Welcome back for another garden tour. The month of June has gone by so fast. There has been so much going on here in the garden, and I'm super excited to show you guys around. If you guys remember, I planted some poppies back in here. Those bloomed and left so fast. This is my first year growing poppies, and I had no idea it was such a fast, like, snap of the fingers bloom time. So I interplanted some zinnias in with the poppies once I figured out that they had a really short bloom time, so that once the poppies are all finished blooming, we'll have zinnias come up here. So further down this same row is where I planted all of my zinnias. The kids helped me plant all these. They really like the flowers, especially my daughter. Zinnias are one of my favorite flowers. They bloom almost all summer long. They last a really long time, and they make really pretty bouquets, and you can cut them and bring them in your house, which I love because I love my garden. I just want to bring it inside wherever I am. We have some echinacea here. Echinacea is really easy to grow in my area just because it's a native plant to here, and it also brings in a lot of beneficial bugs. And the biggest bonus of all is that it's a perennial, so it comes back every single year. I love that. I love easy plants in the garden that just keep coming back. This garden bed had all of my garlic in it. I harvested all of the garlic all in one night. It was a crazy night. This is a variety called Lore's Italian. I haven't grown this before. It is not an elephant garlic, it's a soft neck, and I can't believe how big it is. I wanted to give you guys an update on my experiment with the direct sown onions in this first area. Right now, these direct sown onions are starting to bulb up, but they're not getting very big because they didn't have enough time for that green growth on the stem to happen. They're bulbing, but they're pretty small at this point. And already some of them are starting to flop over, saying that they're mature and they're finished, but all of the bulbs are really kind of tiny. And the big takeaway from this is that I need to sow these earlier in the year. So I'm going to try again next year, but sow them about 3 weeks earlier, and also cover them with a row cover in case we have any very hard frosts that will affect the growth of the onions. The other thing is the onions are suffering from a foliar disease, which is also affecting their growth. So I'm hoping that if I plant them a little bit earlier next year, we might be able to have a better harvest. The red onions that I transplanted, they look so much better, and I think it has a lot to do with the variety. It's called Rosa di Milano. Next we have the carrots, and I did 3 different successions of carrots this year. I just kept planting every 2 weeks, and the first batch of carrots is ready for harvest. I'm going to be harvesting all of those hopefully here in this next week. So at this point, they're still really sweet and they taste really good. If I leave them in the ground too long, they'll start to get this woody texture, which thankfully they have not developed yet. And in the summer, carrots can get to that point a lot faster. I also planted some garbanzo beans in here, black garbanzo beans. They're coming up and looking good. When they first came up, I almost thought it was a weed because it didn't look like a bean. It kind of surprised me what it looked like. Then behind those, I have some cilantro that's going to seed. I'm saving the seed from that, and arugula that I'm saving the seed from, so they're big. And then I also have my kale, and this whole back area I took off the row cover that was there, and I was just getting ready to like pull my kale out, and I noticed I had let my chickens into the garden because they are doing a really good job eating bugs, and the chickens were using it as like a shade cover because it's so big. So I just decided to leave it in there for the chickens, and they're also nibbling at it because they love kale. So The kale's still there. It doesn't look very pretty, but the chickens are really enjoying it. This month we also planted all of our sweet corn, and we always have to cover our planting with nets, and then once it's big enough we remove the nets from the planting and they grow up just fine. We have a lot of bird pressure and they will eat all of our seed if we leave it uncovered. They're growing great, and I did a little bit of an experiment in here in the corn, and it's been really cool to see what has happened. So I did a cover crop of peas, oats, and crimson clover in these first 2 rows, and in the 3rd row I left that row fallow for a couple months. So it did have a cover crop over the winter, and then I pulled it back and I was going to plant in it, but I was like, no, I want to see kind of what happens here. So I left it fallow for maybe 6 weeks, and then these ones had a cover crop of peas, oats, and the crimson clover in them. It only got to about maybe 15 inches tall, and then it was time to cover these with the tarp so that they could die back and I could plant corn in here in time. I am really impressed with the difference that's going on here. I don't know if it's very visible in the video, but these first 2 rows are much larger, much healthier. I had a better germination rate from the first 2 rows where I had these cover crops in them. But it's been really cool to see what a big difference the cover crops make when you use them in the garden. I am very interested to see how that turns out in terms of harvest and what difference that makes. I pulled out all of my snap peas, and in its place I planted cowpeas. These cowpeas are called Ozark Razorback cowpeas. They're just one of my absolute favorites. For the last several years I have been seed saving these. They do not have a lot of the diseases that beans do that I struggle with here. So instead of doing a lot of dried beans, I've been doing more of the cowpeas. So my cucumbers are starting to take off. I planted these right underneath my shelling peas. I've done this for several years. It's always a successful thing for me, just because as soon as one dies off, the other starts to take off, and you have no gaps in between plantings. So when the shelling peas were done, I just snipped the tops of the plants off and took them. I left the roots in the ground, and so far they've been doing really well. Right now we're dealing with a little bit of cucumber beetles. Actually, I'm saying a little bit, but it's actually a lot. I've never seen them so bad in my garden. I've had several gardens. I have had cucumber beetles before, but never quite this bad. When I first started gardening, I had a cucumber beetle problem, and what I did is I went out and I got those yellow sticky traps with the pheromone attractant on it, and I put those up, and it was very effective. However, I found it was not very specific to the cucumber beetle. So I would get things like bees on there, butterflies, anything that is a pollinator that is attracted to something yellow would also land on there. So I'm trying to avoid using that, just because I feel like that's not a great way to handle your pests, is to also kill off some of your beneficial bugs. I don't really like that idea, so I'm really trying to avoid doing that at this point. So what I've been doing is just taking duct tape and hand getting the cucumber beetles off of the plants. I do that with my squash bugs as well. It's super effective. The other thing that I have done is I planted another succession of cucumbers in case these ones don't make it. I already lost several to wilt from the cucumber beetles. Planted about 15, and I think I've already lost 5 or 6 of my cucumbers. So I'm doing another succession, which will be great. It'll be good to have some more cucumbers later in the season, kind of even out the harvest and all of that. So in the end, I think it'll be good. On this next row, I had some little gem lettuce, and it's just starting to bolt. So I'm going through my lettuce, and I'm going to save some seed from this little gem lettuce. What I'm looking for is, I'm probably going to pick one that is not bolting yet, that is slower to bolt, And I'm also going to pick one that has really good shape, and I'm going to save seed from that. And then the rest I'm just going to harvest probably this week. I throw it all in a bowl of ice water to try and take out some of the bitterness that is in lettuce when you pick it in the heat. It's been 90 degrees for about a month now, so these are starting to get a little bit bitter, but that's okay, we eat them anyway. So I'm just gonna finish harvesting these. And then behind that is where I had the celery, I had the cabbage, and I had shelling peas. I pulled all of those out just in this last week, cleaned up the area. In this spot, I'm going to be planting some green beans and some yellow beans. So we've got the lettuce and then asparagus. I really don't have much to say about my asparagus other than it's growing, which is good. So I'm going to kind of skip over the asparagus, save you guys from a long monologue about asparagus. So the next area, the strawberries, the only thing I wanted to mention about them is that it's time for me to cut off all of the runners that are going on here. I really wanted to keep these to just the mother plants, and the mother plants I planted 1 foot apart. So I really need to keep that spacing. So I'm going to go through and cut all these runners off. And I'm also going to add some more mulch as I go through and do that, kind of pick out some of the weeds. So this is where I have all of my peppers planted. Last year I saved my seed from my Emerald Giant peppers because they did especially well in my garden. I grabbed the biggest and the best looking pepper and I saved seed from that and a couple others. And I'm growing them again and I'm going to be saving seed again. I did plant them about a month before I planted all of my hot peppers so that there would be no crossing and pollination, and I could save seed from this first batch of peppers while they were still planted close together. Behind the sweet peppers, I have a whole bunch of hot peppers. I have yellow jalapenos, regular jalapenos, poblano. I have Korean chili peppers because I really like making my own kimchi. So here is the caterpillar tunnel. It is all tomatoes. I have some basil in here and I have some ginger in here right now. Also a couple seed starts. So overall, it's been a really good tomato year so far. The plants look really healthy. We haven't had as much disease as we normally would this time of year. The only issue that I've really had is we have hornworms on the plants. So I've been handpicking those off and throwing them to our chicks, who absolutely love hornworms. They think it's the best tree ever. So it's been a great year. We have mostly paste tomatoes, as I have mentioned in previous videos, for the canning, and then we also have some heirlooms mixed in here. So it looks like it'll just be a week or two and we'll be into tomato harvest season. So this is the area where I had winter rye growing, the cover crop, and then I covered that with the tarp. And once we uncovered the tarp, I was able to plant summer squash, we planted butternut squash, we planted several different types of watermelon, and then we planted sunflowers in the next row over. And then in this row over here, we have trailing nasturtium, which will crawl along with the squash, and the hope is that it deters some of the squash bugs. I'm in my squash right now, and these are lemon squash. They are awesome. Like, if you have squash bugs, I highly recommend growing lemon squash as an alternative to growing zucchini because it stands up to the squash bugs so well. If you remember from the last garden tour, I had just hilled up my potatoes, and right after that I decided to add a bunch of hay over the top of them because I really wanted to make sure that I conserve the moisture. Now I know this hay does have weed seeds, and I may regret this later on, but at this point I've been really happy that I did that. The plants look way better. It's been keeping the weeds down, Just really conserving the moisture. Regular potatoes, they don't like heat, and so when you have all of this mulch and hay on the top, it really helps to keep the soil cool. So they've been doing much better. So this is where I planted all of my sweet potatoes, and I also put hay on top of this area. I planted them a little bit late in the season, so I'm still hoping they do well enough. And then down at the end of this row, I have some green beans that I planted. They're looking really good. Did the same thing, just covered them with some mulch.